Welcome and good morning. We are so happy you all are able to join us this morning. As everyone's coming in, please use the chat box to say hello, tell us your name, your role, and your favorite fall beverage. Personally, for me right now, I've been drinking a lot of ginger tea, not necessarily a fall beverage, but the mornings have been nice and cool outside. So I've been really enjoying some hot tea. Not so much in the afternoons, though. But we would love to hear what you all are enjoying this October. And as y'all are doing that and people are coming in, during today's session, we will be using the chat for some different engagement activities. And then we'll also be using the Q&A session for questions at the end. But also we're going to be using that feature in Zoom, the Q&A feature. So please put your questions in the Q&A throughout the session so we can ensure that we address all of those. And just a few things for this morning's session. All of our webinars are recorded and will be sent out to all of our registrants. So if you know a colleague that wasn't able to make it this morning that registered, no worries, they'll get the recording as well. And of course, you can always share our webinars and our resources with anyone you'd like to. And just so you know, in addition to the recording, you'll also receive our presentation slide deck, as well as a resource document that has all the links to all the resources that we'll be covering today. So that being said, feel free to sit back and enjoy because you will get all of this content later. You can also take notes during the time and again, ask questions. And so as I mentioned, please put those questions in the Q&A function in Zoom. And we'll be answering some of those throughout the main portion of the session as well as at the end. And we also have all of our upcoming and previous webinars posted on our webpage as well as our YouTube channel. So feel free to browse some of those previous topics as well. All right. So for those of you just joining us, good morning and welcome to Advising Students with Disabilities with Texas OnCourse. As we all know, transitioning into adulthood for students with disabilities requires careful planning and support to ensure they have the skills and services needed to be successful. So this morning, we will be discussing transition planning. We'll be providing an overview of legal requirements under IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and provide methods to engage family, community, and campus team collaboration for our special education students. So just a quick agenda. After I complete the welcome and introductions, our guest speaker, Chris Nelson, who will introduce himself shortly, will cover the main portion of the session, advising students with disability. He will be sharing a lot of valuable information around transition services and the law, Texas Transition and Employment Guide, as well as differences between high school and college for students with disabilities, as well as just really opportunities to engage everyone in the transition process, because as we all know, it really is a team effort. And then Lauren is going to share our bright ideas. These ideas came from you all, so thank you so much. These came through some of the questions that we asked during the registration process. So thank you so much for sharing those. And then I'm going to share a couple courses and modules in the Academy as our spotlight. And Jared will talk about some of our upcoming events and as well as some ways that you guys can stay better connected with Texas OnCourse. And then, of course, we'll wrap it up with our Q&A session. So again, remember to drop those questions into the Zoom Q&A feature. All right, so I'd like to briefly introduce our team, the Professional Learning and Engagement team. We will be your hosts for the Professional Learning Webinars series this year. My name is Andrea Panter. I am the Senior Network Coordinator, and I have the privilege of working with Lauren Disher, our Professional Learning Coordinator, Jared Garza, our Network Marketing Coordinator, and our amazing leader, Laura Guggen, our Director of Professional Learning and Engagement. And they are all on the line today, as you can see them, and available to answer any questions that you may have.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining.
And now for the man of the hour, we are pleased to have Chris Nelson join us today. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being in attendance at this advising students with disabilities webinar today here with Texas OnCourse. My name is Chris Nelson. I'm the transition specialist at the Education Service Center Region 13. We are located in Austin, Texas. There's 20 service centers across the state, so there's one near you somewhere. And I'm located again here in Austin. That's my email and phone number. I'm sure that'll be shared a few times throughout the presentation. If anybody has questions for me, let me know throughout or at the end. Happy to tackle some of those and happy to be here.
Thank you, Chris. We are so thankful to have you joining us this morning. Here at Texas OnCourse, our mission is to provide advising professionals with the resources and community they need to deliver exceptional college and career advising to every student. And so we keep this at the forefront of our mind as we're creating all of our materials, our resources, and presentations that we can provide for you all. Again, so welcome to the Texas OnCourse Professional Learning Series. I just wanted to share with some of you that may be new. As most of you already know, we host these sessions the second Tuesday of every month at 10 a.m. And we extended them to 90 minutes for just to allow some extra time for content as well as Q&A. So our next session is in November, November 12th, actually. We will be collaborating with TEA during this time to provide you guys with resources on how dual credit can be beneficial for your students and their post-secondary success. So as I mentioned, we're going to have a couple things that we drop in the chat. So as we transition into advising students with disabilities, we would like to know in your current role, how do you serve special education students? Or I was also thinking earlier this morning, like maybe you aren't currently serving special education students, but how do you think you could serve special education students? So please provide those answers for us in the chat. And then I will transition over to Chris. As you guys are putting that in the chat, he's going to take over my screen so that he can share his portion of the presentation.
And as Chris does that, we have some good answers coming in. We have a couple saying not currently. Chris still provides support for college. We have a transition specialist on board. Julie Wood advises students in classes to proctor testing for DS students. Very good. Bridget is the art facilitator and the TED. Very cool. Help with our students in all things transition related. This is the perfect place for all that information. Charity provides advising for post-secondary life. These are all great. Thank you so much for all of your participation. We love reading what you guys have to say.
Awesome. Yeah, I like just as we were coming in with the introductions with our favorite fall beverage, a lot of different roles kind of for our attendees today. Folks wearing, I'm sure, a lot of hats. But hopefully, you have some way of engaging with our students that are receiving special education services. I saw a lot of folks in a kind of a transition role. Hopefully you get some good takeaways from today, as well as our others. We're going to be more in that advising process for all students. All right. So for today, for advising students with disabilities, we looked at the different topics we'll be covering a little bit earlier with our agenda. We're going to start with transition services in the law. We're really going to dive into what specifically is defined under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, as well as sections of the Texas Education Code and Texas Administrative Code. Might be a review, for some folks that are working in a very transition-centric role. For others, hopefully this is a good overview of what your staff is taking on within your school district when it comes to planning for transition services, and just think about ways that you can weave in your role to advising our students with disabilities. So first, again, transition services in the law. We're going to focus on IDEA, the Texas Education Code, and the Texas Administrative Code. First, we start at the federal side. So we're starting with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This is in 300.320B. You will see throughout the presentation, and I know a lot of the Texas OnCourse team will be putting links into the chat as well. Anywhere in the presentation that's kind of underlined here, that's a hyperlink. You can see my little hand over it. If you click on it, that should take you to a regulation under this law section if you want to have direct access to that as well. Under this section of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that is where we find the definition of Individualized Education Program, or IEP. We have a subsection which discusses beginning not later than the first IEP to be in effect by age 16. Again, please note in our state, this is 14, which I'll talk about a little more later. The IEP must include, and we have our transition specific items. So in that IEP, we need to have those appropriate measurable post-secondary goals that are going to be based upon age-appropriate transition assessments. And we have transition services, including courses of study that are needed to assist the child in reaching those goals. So this is information that has to be within the IEP as addressed under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. We will see when we look at some of the Texas regulations that we have additional items that we would like to address, as well as difference in age to what is federally mandated for all of the states. A little bit of difference here in our state. Also in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, we have another section, 300.43. That one is titled Transition Services itself, and that is where we're defining what that means. So on the prior slide, it talked about transition services. I'll go back to that one here. Right here where it says transition services, including courses of study. Now we've defined, what are those transition services? What does that mean? So in this section, it's actually defining that as something called a coordinated set of activities for a child with a disability that's going to be focused on really improving their achievement, whether it's academically, whether it's functional achievement, again, with that overall goal, supporting their movement from what they're taking on now in school to what's after school, whatever that happens to be for them for those post-school activities. Within that section of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, they identify some areas for us that we would need to focus on as part of this coordinated set of activities. And you can see we have all of these headings listed here. It should include activities related to instruction that the student is taking on, related services, if that's applicable for the individual student, thinking about community experiences. Is there any activities that the student with disabilities would need to support them in being able to access their community, take on different items within their community, employment and other post-school adult living objectives. And then at the end, if appropriate, again, based on the individual student, acquisition of daily living skills and the provision of a functional vocational evaluation. It's going to be more on that career side. Also within the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, we have this section 300.321 that covers something called the IEP team, which if you're from another state, that might be a more familiar term. In our state, we call that the Admission Review Dismissal Committee or the ARD Committee. So wherever you see IEP team or IEP meeting mentioned through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, just think of that as ARD Committee in our state for our terminology. Under required participants, there's one other little subsection B where it provides some information about transition services specifically. We're identifying that the child with a disability must be invited to attend that meeting if a purpose will be consideration of post-secondary goals and the transition services, which we defined earlier as that coordinated set of activities that are needed to assist them in reaching those goals. And then to the extent appropriate, based on that individual student need, if there's a representative of any participating agency that might be responsible for providing or paying for transition services. Again, that is with the prior written consent of the parent or the adult student once they reach 18, the age of majority. So this is another section that identifies some regulations about who needs to be at that IEP team meeting, or in our state, our ARD committee meeting, when we're discussing transition services and the importance of having the student involvement in their ARD committee. After that, we focus on more of the regulations that are specific to our state in Texas when it comes to transition services in the law. In the Texas Education Code, we have section 29.011. That is just titled Beginning of Transition Planning. And that is where it clearly outlines for us that although we just looked at IDEA and they want us to start that transition planning and components by age 16 for those measurable post-secondary goals based on the age-appropriate transition assessments and the transition services, including the courses of study. In our state, we want to begin that not later than when the student reaches 14 years of age. So the important takeaway on our difference here in Texas is for students that are, age 13, they're going to be turning 14 sometime during that IEP plan year. We need to ensure that we are addressing transition. And so we want to make sure that we're taking that on during an ARD committee meeting. A lot of times that takes place during what's considered the student's annual review meeting that they will have once a year. It also addresses the importance of thinking about those transition services at middle school. I know a lot of times we think about post-secondary outcomes and we're working with our high school students, but with our age starting at 14, a lot of this work is going to start at middle school. And so it's very important that our middle school educators are aware of the transition services and the law responsibilities when it comes to documentation in the IEP document. In the Texas Education Code, and they also have kind of aligning information in the Texas Administrative Code. We have those two sections of section 29.011 when it's the Texas Education Code, and the Texas Administrative Code, that's a rule 89.1055. On the Texas Education Code, it's called Transition Planning and explains the need for procedures that have to specify how the ARD committee is going to consider and, if appropriate, address the transition planning issues in the IEP. And then in the Texas Administrative Code itself, it takes that information and outlines in some specific subsections about what measures need to be looked at in the IEP by age 14. And then there's some others that need to be addressed by age 18 when the student is going to be an adult student. And we have the rights that will be transferred over to them, their educational rights as an adult. So in our Texas Administrative Code, and that section that addresses the IEP, we're going to see that there's a variety of items that need to be considered by age 14 to be effective in the IEP, that we want to look at the student's involvement in their transition to life outside the public school system. So we want to make sure that we've documented how we're including the student in this conversation and the decision-making. Involvement by others that need to be part of this conversation. Sometimes that's going to be the parent and guardian. It might be others within the school district in which the student's enrolled, anyone that has that information that can support transition planning for the student, whether they're invited by the student and the family, they're invited by the school district. It's important to include involvement from those that know the student well. Other items we need to address by age 14 in our state: appropriate post-secondary education options. So, and we have a section of this webinar later where we're going to look specifically at college as part of our transition and employment guide. But thinking about, there are a lot of different post-secondary education options out there based on our individual student and what our transition assessment data is showing us. What are those options that they are most interested in, and what kind of preparation do they need for that coursework? What examinations do they need to take? Are they looking to be, for TSI readiness, thinking about the SAT, the ACT? Are there any examinations that they would need to take because of their interest in college or university? If they're looking more at, maybe a career college or some kind of technical college, what would they need to take for that? If they're entering the military, do they have an opportunity to take the ASVAB, for example? So again, tailoring that to the individual student and their needs. Another item that needs to be addressed is an appropriate functional vocational evaluation. That would be a lot of times for students where maybe we've done some assessment about their career readiness or maybe career needs, but we need to dive a little bit deeper to learn more about the student to help support their career planning. That could be something that might be a topic to broach. Other items that we'll address within the IEP document itself: circumstances for facilitating a referral of the student or family to a governmental agency for services. That includes the Medicaid waiver programs that we have here in our state. And so for our students that might have needs that are going to be longer, lifelong, or lasting, well after high school is over, by age 14, we need to ensure that within the IEP, we're supporting a referral to other agencies or organizations that can provide those supports for them after we're no longer here in the public school district. Other items to be addressed, supplementary aid services, curricula, other opportunities that can assist the student in developing decision-making skills. We'll talk a lot about self-determination and self-advocacy when it comes to our differences between high school and college for students section in a little bit. The other area here is, again, fostering that independence, self-determination, supported decision-making. That is a way that a student can name another person once they are an adult to help them in a variety of ways with decision-making, whether it's educational decision-making, maybe about medical decision-making or financial means. There's something called a supported decision-making agreement that is under the Texas Estates Code. Also, we'll see there's a lot that needs to be addressed by age 14. This is where we're bringing in those components from IDEA that we looked at a little bit earlier. Again, by age 14 in our state, we want to make sure that the IEP is addressing those appropriate measurable post-secondary goals. They should be based on age-appropriate transition assessments. The areas that they are going to review are training, education, employment, and where appropriate, independent living skills. All students need to have a goal in the area of training and education, a measurable post-secondary goal in the IEP that outlines, what are those next steps after high school is over when it comes to training and education. And then they need one for employment, one post-secondary goal that's focusing on what are their employment goals for after school is over. Independent living skills, that would depend on the individual student and their need. We also have to look at those transition services, which we defined earlier as that coordinated set of activities, including courses of study needed to assist the student in reaching their post-secondary goals. Courses of study for anyone that is on our webinar today that might be in more of a kind of a career counselor kind of lens, that's thinking about like your 4-year plan or your personal graduation plan, and how is that going to align well with the student and supporting them toward reaching their post-secondary goals. So a lot of times information that your ARD committee might utilize might be in the hands of the high school counselor, for example, when it comes to the personal graduation plan. So that was all age 14. We also have a small section where we're looking at some regulations related to transition by age 18. So once the student reaches 18, they will be in charge of their educational rights unless there's some kind of clear guardianship in place. The ARD committee must consider and address varying issues when we come to age 18, a little bit beyond what we had at 14. Once we get to age 18, we want to think about the involvement in the student's transition. Again, if others are invited. So now the student is kind of the decision maker at this point. So if they want to invite their parent or guardian or other person to participate, that's going to be their decision as they are now the adults. But the school district can also invite personnel as well still. So if the school district wants to invite a family, even though that student is now an adult student, they still can do that as addressed here where it says is invited to participate by the student or the school district in which the student has enrolled. Or if they have that consent under that supported decision-making agreement, the student might name a person who they would like to continue to be involved in their transition and future planning. Also, once we reach age 18, there's an importance of thinking about the availability of age-appropriate instructional environments. So as students are getting older, in our state and in other states, you can have continued service provision under IDEA until the age of 21. And you can even turn 22 that school year and continue to receive services for special education or related services under IDEA. And so as your students are getting older, really thinking about what environments, do we have within our district or maybe on a district-owned property or in our community that are going to really support the student in working toward those post-secondary goals, whether it's an education training related goal, focusing on employment or independent living. And so that's another consideration that we now have once we reach 18 is, what environments are available for students to work on those skills that will help support them with those positive post-secondary outcomes. All right. So again, a question based on our review of transition services in the law. Again, we looked at IDEA, we looked at the Texas Administrative Code and Texas Education Code. If you don't mind answering in the chat, our question here is, at what age does transition planning start in the state of Texas?
I see answers coming in. We have a lot of people saying 14.
Good. That means I did a good job.
Yes, you did.
Awesome. I
great.
like 14. Good state of Texas. Awesome.
Good job, everyone.
Hooray. You're a good
Perfect.
audience. All righty. Section 2. So now we're going to take a dive into the Texas Transition and Employment Guide. I'm going to walk us through one of the sections, and you'll see a lot of the sections are pretty similar. This is a great resource for everyone. It's written toward a student and parent audience, but there's some great takeaways in there for educators. They'll be revising the guide in this year, which I think I go into here in a little bit. But we're going to kind of dive into one of the chapters. Know that the content about the Texas Transition Employment Guide is also going to be within the slides. So the information that I show for the college chapter that we're going to highlight, you should have relevant information here on the slides that you can take away as well. So what is the Texas Transition and Employment Guide? For some background and some context, that we go way back to 2013. There was a House bill during the 83rd legislative session, which added a section to the Texas Education Code that I've linked here, 290112. It called for the development of a transition and employment guide, again, for that student audience and their families to provide information on statewide services and programs that assist in the transition to life outside of the public school system. So until 2013, there was not a standard, statewide guide that was published and available for folks. So this is, relatively recent. If we think about this, about 11 years ago, is kind of the background of when this kind of all started. The current version, so it gets reauthorized every 3 years or so by the state statute. The current version is called Pathways. There's a picture of what the cover page looks like. You can find that on the Texas Education Agency's Texas SPED Support website, and I have that linked here. It's currently available in those 5 languages listed: English, Spanish, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Korean. If you're not familiar with Texas SPED Support, if you go to the link there, what that website is it is a large resource that Texas Education Agency created and launched last year. And it houses all of their resources. So any best practices, information, any kind of training that TEA wants to make sure in relation to special education is available, has contact information for education service center representatives in different areas of special education. There's a lot there. So if you haven't reviewed Texas SPED Support before, definitely recommend it. It's a good resource that you can find a lot of information regarding special education all in one place. The structure of the guide itself. So there's 9 chapters currently in this resource, the Texas Transition and Employment Guide. Here they are listed here. We're going to focus specifically on college, but you'll see that they work in a pretty similar manner in terms of a lot of the way that it's written. This school year, there is an updated version that is set to be published, and we'll add 2 chapters on technology and transportation for some considerations for students with disabilities and thinking about that transition to adulthood. So we're going to take a deeper dive into the college chapter, and we're going to use the guide itself to do that. So I'm going to bring up the guide itself, and we're going to take a look at that. Again, the slide content should have information about the college chapter that we'll be looking at as well. So here's our transition and employment guide pathways that I've pulled from the Texas SPED Support website. You'll see in the table of contents, we have the different chapters. And again, we're going to click on the college chapter specifically to take a little bit of a deeper dive into one section of this guide. The college section and all sections start with some different considerations typically. Some kind of consideration based on whatever the topic is, written toward the student. For college specifically, they talk about learning in adulthood. Maybe that's, you're hearing that as being a term of higher education, post-secondary education, giving different terms that the student might hear. Gives you lots of options to consider. So we think about college or university, community college coming up fairly often, career college, maybe a technical or trade school, online learning. There's a variety of types of online learning that can support us toward that attainment of our future educational goals, career goals. Post-secondary programs and services for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It's kind of rising. We have currently 19 in Texas. Actually, I don't know if anyone was on my event I did a few weeks ago for Texas post-secondary education options. I had 8 colleges and universities with these programs come and speak on them. If anybody wants more on that, please email me. Happy to share information about those types of programs. There are programs that are geared specifically for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities or similar disabilities, and they focus on typically some kind of credential or a way to have some sort of college experience. It might not be a degree seeking program, but it allows our students that may not meet that typical profile of being able to enter college or university, but it allows them to have a college experience and works towards some kind of credential typically, or provides them with other experiences that should help them when it comes to post-secondary outcomes. So that's another item listed. Community, maybe informal continuing education, on the job training, or just other types of learning. Thinking about what would you like to do after high school? How can we help you get there? There's a discussion of accommodations and modifications. So going into thinking about, in the student lens currently, what kind of supports do you have? And if you think about college, and we'll talk about some of those differences between high school and college a little later, it's important to know, what kind of supports do you receive right now, and what kind of supports might you need in the future. And it does talk about here, some of those supports might not be available, in your program when it comes to the future. And they have some additional planning conversation questions we'll look at. In every chapter of the Texas Transition and Employment Guide, they have an individual student story. I think that's a great way to make connections to the content that's covered in the Texas Transition and Employment Guide. In this instance, we have a planning story here, where it talks a lot about supports in college, the importance of that planning that took place in high school. The student had a visual impairment, and so they needed very specific accommodations, and it talked about their way to go to the student supports office and provide their proof of disability. And they had, some difficulty with a class, and they were able to kind of problem solve that with the personnel from their accessibility or student supports office in this scenario. So again, each of the chapters has a little scenario that kind of helps make that connection for students to someone that has gone through, kind of in their shoes and has that real life experience. After that, there's always a My Life, My Voice section. Here in our college chapter of the Texas Transition and Employment Guide, it thinks about different activities to take on, or skills that you might need to work on. This one's specific to self-determination. And so thinking about post-secondary education that's going to be, thereafter high school's over, it gives some ideas of some activities to take on that'll help prepare them for post-secondary education. And so every section has a My Life, My Voice in it, and it's going to be tailored to that content with some different activities or ideas of some ways to, take on some skills now or work on some activities now that will help you for being successful after high school is over and you're out in the community. The last part they have is they have the spotlighted supports on this page as well. For the college chapter, they're focusing on the Disability Services Office. That's going to help our students with disabilities understand that, if they need supports within the college or university setting, there's going to be an Office of Disability Services Officer similarly named that could potentially provide some supports in terms of accommodations. And then at the end of each section, they have it's like a note-taking guide, and they have questions to ask. I like that the questions to ask kind of change dependent on each chapter. There's always questions to ask the art committee, and so it's for the student to think about, what are some questions they might have specific to this content. So if they're learning more about what they're going to need for college entrance, they can ask, folks within their art committee, what accommodations or modifications have helped me over time. If they're not as certain, they can look at kind of that review within the IEP. Who can they talk to? So if it's maybe not someone in the art committee, maybe it's another member within the school district, or an organization that's partnering with the school district. Who can I talk to if I have questions about planning for higher education? So it's really bringing in all the pertinent stakeholders that are needed to support that student in their college attendance. In this section, they have questions to ask college and career counselor, high school as well. This is going to be information that might be more held by someone in a counselor or advisor kind of role versus maybe a special education team member at an art committee. And so it has more specific questions for a person that's typically in this type of role. And then some additional questions that you could ask the Disability Services Office. So perhaps the student's a senior. They go, I know, exactly what college I want to go to. I've been accepted. They could use these questions in the guide to potentially ask more, and get ready for those next steps if they'll be applying for accommodations at their college or university. And then it goes on to the next chapter. But that's just a little glimpse at how the chapters, are looking on that end. And again, we'll see, I'm going to skip through now, the content from our deeper dive is available in your slides there. The question that we have at the end of the second section is, how could you use the transition and employment guide in your role? So I know that we have varying folks with varying types of roles. And that's our question we have at the end of this section, if you wouldn't mind answering that in the chat.
Does anybody want to chime in and answer the question?
I hope my transition and employment designee friends have a way that they utilize the Texas Transition and Employment Guide in their role. Sorry, I didn't mean to call you out, but I saw some of y'all in the chat in the TED role, and I'm like, I hope that there's ways that you can use this in your role.
Oh, we have some answers. Self-assessments for students. Lisa said, as a guideline for all options for post-secondary goals. Very good. Help with
Awesome.
the art process. That's a great one. Fred said, share it with our students, especially when they're doing college visits using the college part.
Awesome.
That
That's a great
chapter.
idea.
That's great, yeah. We had another assisting with the art process, providing high school students with the skills needed for post-secondary. Great, Roberto. Bridget says the guide could be used to help with transition planning before ARD meetings and could be the coordinated set of activities. This is so great. Chelsea said, you can use the guide to support decisions made by the student to plan for their future. The information provided could also be used in ARD meetings. These are great answers, guys. Chris, you did
Awesome.
a great job. You're doing awesome.
No, I bet we got some good takeaways. I love I didn't even think about before the college visit idea. We can maybe take that with you. If the student had an opportunity to stop by the Student Disability Services Office or similar, and they had, just a set of questions they could ask on a tour. I love that idea. I'm going to take that one and bring it with me for future training ideas. I like that a lot.
That's awesome.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. So our third section, we're going to dive into some of those differences between high school and college for students with disabilities, because there's some big differences that take place after high school is over. So I say, wait, where's my IEP? So again, for our students with disabilities, we find that there are some big differences. So we do have protections still available. That's going to be particularly from Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And then Title II or III, which comes into play with the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 or the ADA. Some of those protections may be available for a person with a disability once they exit high school, but college or university is not required to provide a free and appropriate public education, such as through the Individualized Education Program or IEP for a student with disabilities. So the protections under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act are no longer in place once the student exits high school. And so they may have been receiving special education or related services in high school, but a college or university is not required to provide that once they reach college. So what does Section 504 look like at more of that post-secondary level? There's a frequently asked questions about Section 504 that the Office of Civil Rights has. That's a really good resource. It discusses that the recipient, so the college or university would be required to provide students with appropriate academic adjustments, auxiliary aids and services that are necessary to afford the individual with a disability an equal opportunity to participate in a school program. So again, there's no requirement to make any kind of adjustments or provide something that would result in what's considered a fundamental alteration of a program or impose an undue burden on the college or university. I did give an example, and you can kind of find those at various places on the college and university websites. I gave Texas Tech, they had a good page that talked about, here are some of our, typical classroom accommodations, that we may have available for students or that are requested. And so I have that hyperlinked there in the document for where Texas Tech University, as an example in our state, discusses what they find to be reasonable classroom accommodations. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act or ADA, under Title II, that's where we're protecting qualified individuals with disabilities from discrimination based on the basis of disability. And that can be in any kind of services, programs, activities that are provided by a state or local governmental entity. And so it's going to be like publicly funded entities. It extends those to any activity on that end. Title III, that's going to be more typically for a privately owned or non-residential facility that needs to comply with those standards. That prevents discrimination on the basis of disability in the activities of those places of public accommodation. And that's typically going to be more for your businesses that are open to the public and commercial facilities to make sure that there's not discrimination on the basis of disability. For a student with a disability, when we think about more of the Americans with Disabilities Act, what that could potentially look like is accessible parking, transportation. Maybe they have priority registration for courses needed, or maybe there's some other kind of adaptive furniture, a housing related accommodation that will support them from not facing that discrimination. Again, looking at their disability and what would be needed. And then thinking about self-advocacy, there's a big importance there as well. So in high school, we have a team. We have in our state, the ARD committee, and we have others that are involved and supportive of the student. That might include educators. Maybe that is including, the family that are helping advocate on behalf of the student. Once they get to college or university and they're an adult, it's now up to the student to advocate for their own needs. And so we talked about self-advocacy and self-determination, which comes into play as part of the transition planning by age 14 and hopefully earlier even. But if we start that discussion and work on that decision making at earlier ages, again, we help build those skills up, because once they reach college, it's on them. They really have to go and advocate on their own as the adults. Again, they can enlist others to support them. Maybe they want to have a parent or guardian, be part of a call they need to make to the Disability Services Office, or they want them to sit with them as they have a conversation with the personnel of the college or university about their accommodation needs. But it's going to be up to them to advocate for what they may need to be successful at that level. Some steps to take, and we referred to this earlier a little bit during the discussion of the Texas Transition and Employment Guide in the college chapter. Each college or university is going to have a Office of Disability Services. There's a variety of titles. It could be a Student Accessibility Services, Student Supports Office. There's varying titles out there for that type of office. That's going to be kind of that first stop for the student with disabilities. At this time, sometimes that it's not going to be an in-person stop. It might be something that they're taking on online first. There's information they might provide online, and then they might meet with someone in an office. For other colleges or universities, it might be best to just go to the specific office itself. Thinking about that entrance to college or university, an activity a student could do while in high school is first identify, what is that office? What is the title? Where is it at my college or university that I'm interested in attending? Learning more about the registration process. Most colleges or universities are pretty clear about, what that process is going to look like. And it will discuss, what kind of documentation they might need as part of that process in applying for accommodation. And so if that's taken on maybe during their high school years in anticipation of entering the college or university, they could learn a lot more about what they need now and what they need to ask the team members at their high school for. What information am I going to need to gather while I'm in high school that can help me when I go to those next steps? The good thing is, a lot of that information should still be available for a number of years afterwards. So if they needed to reach back out to their school in their fall semester, for example, they could still gather, some of that documentation. One resource that's out there that's a very good one, thinking about students with disabilities and accessing college or university. The Texas Council for Developmental Disabilities, they created a large resource guide. It's called the Higher Education Resource Guide for Students with Disabilities. It focuses on a future college student audience with disabilities, parents, high school counselors, other educators. It really tackles, a variety of audiences. It has a lot of tips on preparing for higher education for a student that has disabilities, how to plan while you're in high school, what to do once you're accepted. They also have a section at the bottom of the document, which is available in English and Spanish currently. It has links to disability service offices web pages for many colleges and universities throughout our state. So that itself is a great resource because it gives you links to those websites specifically. The guide was last updated, I believe, in like 2020. So some of the website links in the resource guide might not be as up to date. And so there is a web page that has those links that I put here as well. I think that one was updated a little more recently, maybe like 2022. You can also typically, by going to the college or university, by typing in the right keywords related to disability, typically you can locate, that entity as well. I think we didn't have a question for part 3, or I missed it. This is for the host team here.
Oh, no, we didn't have a question for part 3.
Okay,
We're just gonna go straight into 4.
No problem. All right. So this last part is about really engaging all in the process. So thinking about how can we engage all in the transition process, who might be part of that process, because there can be a lot of people involved. So who's involved? Who do we involve? So beyond just that student involvement in their transition to life, which we talked about to start in that IEP by age 14, lots of others that should be involved, parent, guardian, school district employees that have that knowledge of the student. For ARD committee purposes, for our ARD meetings, anyone, that's invited to participate by either the parent, guardian, or adult student themselves, the school district who might be providing those invitations, who can help support that student in their transition to life in the community once school is no longer here. To involve others, again, just a reminder that there would need to be that consent of the parent or guardian or adult student if there's a participating agency that would either likely be responsible to provide or pay for those transition services. We would need to invite those representatives, again, with that consent provided in advance, which was identified earlier in the in IDEA and in the Texas Administrative Code as well. Beyond that, I mean, there's going to be a lot of other staff members who could potentially support the process. So although the ARD committee has very very specific members that are going to be part of those meetings, there could be a lot of other folks either on your campus or maybe at your district level that could help the student in their transition to life after high school. And this is just a non-exhaustive list of some folks that could potentially be part of that process. Whether it comes to your counselor or your college career military readiness kind of counselor or staff members, maybe your campus administrative team members like a principal or assistant principal. We have a lot of paraprofessionals that sometimes work more closely with the student than the lead teacher at times. That's a very important person to involve in transition planning because of the amount of time that they spend with a student. They have some great insight. For school districts that have kind of someone in an ARD facilitator or ARD manager role, they're going to hopefully be some good eyes on the paperwork, and they might have some additional suggestions, even if they don't work particularly, individually with that student. Thinking about our related service staff members, our parent liaisons, within our school district that are working with all families, they have great knowledge of different organizations, supports in our community that can help everyone, including our students with disabilities. Other SPED staff, and then our transition and employment designee, which we'll get into here on the next slide. Thinking about engaging all in that process and varying personnel that can support in the area of transition. We talked about the Texas Education Code. There's a section in there. It's 29011, the subsection B. It identifies that every school district, including our charter schools and our shared services arrangements, they have to have at least one employee that is designated to serve to discuss transition and employment services for our students that are enrolled in special education programs. So we have to have at least one employee that has that specific role. That is known as the Transition and Employment Designee, or TED. It'll be seen a lot as. I know we have some TEDs here today, so I appreciate you for attending if you're in the Transition and Employment Designee role for your district in Texas. That person is tasked to provide information and resources about effective transition planning. And they should be kind of that gatekeeper for you, hopefully, of some really good transition knowledge and background. If you have questions relating to a specific student. To find out who that person is, I know we had a question in advance of the registration for the webinar today that asked about, do you know who your TED is? There's a way you can find out. If you're not sure, by asking around within your district, there's also a directory that the Texas Education Agency has. It's called Ask TED. Just to further confuse everyone, we have the TED and we have Ask TED. Ask TED is TEA's directory of district information, has organization information, and also specific personnel role information. And I have that linked here. There is a way you can search by personnel roles for the transition and employment designee for your specific district on that website. Another resource that can be helpful with engaging folks in the transition process is called the Roadmap to Texas Transition Resources. And I have that linked here as well from the Texas SPED Support website. That is a great document that families and students can really use to support those connections to agencies or organizations in their community that can be of support for the student both now and after high school. And it can be really throughout that entire process of special education from birth to 21, having a variety of those resources at your disposal. There's a local resources section in that document that a local district can customize. And so you can identify staff roles that can be of support in the transition process, as well as local agencies that are available. And then there's a resource description section that really defines all of those resources. So this is a great document, again, that highlights a variety of agencies or organizations that could be of support to the student with disabilities, both now and in the future. And again, it can be customized for your individual district. So that's a good, again, available resource for helping that transition into adulthood. That's available from our state. Other ways to try to engage all, you could think about having a transition fair. Transition fairs can really take many forms. It could be maybe it's a specific campus event, maybe it's a district-wide event where there's local agencies and organizations that are going to help those with disabilities in their community that are there. It could take place as part of a virtual event where you have different agencies or organizations coming in and discussing the services that they can provide for persons with disabilities. Maybe it's something that's taking place with a local college or university. I know like there's a good one this month that Baylor University is taking on, and it's about for students with differing healthcare needs that they have taking place. And so they've collaborated, with local schools to have something on their university campus that's focusing on supports for those with disabilities. Or you could have a multi-district kind of collaboration in a specific area of the state. For an example of what a multi-district collaboration could look like, I've linked something called the Destination Life Transition Fair and Conference. That is specific to where I sit here in Central Texas. That is a large scale multi-district collaborative event that supports that transition to adulthood. If you want to check out their website, I've hyperlinked that as well. We have a transition fair and conference coming up here on November 8th in Region 13 for anyone that is watching our event today that's in the Austin area. And I'll make sure I can put a link to that hopefully a little bit later. We just received that. That's coming up in November. The Destination Life example for those that are in Central Texas is on March 1st, 2025 is the next one. Another person or another form of support when we think about engaging all in the transition process. For more information on transition services, you can always reach out to your local education service center. Every education service center in Texas, there's 20 of them, has a transition specialist or a transition consultant. I'm personally the transition specialist or transition consultant for Region 13. So if you're in a school district that is within our territory of Region 13, which is Austin and about an hour and a half radius circle, we're drawing a circle with my finger of Austin, that's going to potentially be you. If you're in another area of Texas, you should also have a transition personnel member you can reach out to. A list of all persons who are currently in that capacity can be found on the Texas Sped Support website that I've kind of highlighted throughout the morning. There's a link there, and you'll search by the topic of transition. If you're having difficulty finding that person, I don't mind if people want to reach out to me, and I can help find my colleague in your territory if you had specific questions for your transition specialist or consultant in your area, because we're here to help you.
Thank you, Chris. As we move in, I'm going to transition to my screen. And we would like to know what is one of the resources you learned about today you would like to dive deeper into. I know we talked a lot about different resources. There's a lot of content there. So we're really curious to hear what you guys have to say. So please answer that in the chat. What is one of the resources that we covered today you learned about that you would like to dive deeper into?
So far, we've had 2 people say the Higher Education Resource Guide. Nicole says transition fairs. Fred said the pathway resource. These are great, guys. Oh, Julie said the roadmap. That's a great one. Pathway resource again. The roadmap to Texas transition resources, very good. These are great. Transition guides from Stacy.
And of course, all of these, again, as we mentioned, will be provided for you guys in our resource documents. So you'll have them there as well. I know we dropped some of the links in the chat, but no worries, you'll get this afterwards as well.
Andrea, can I just jump in and mention something really quick we've put in this year that's really kind of new? Jared, our marketing coordinator, is also writing a summary, which is essentially a blog of what we're doing in the learning series and putting links to all of these resources in that blog. So if you are not, we put that into the follow-up email. So if you have other folks in your special education department or in your district you want to share that with, by all means, please forward that when we send that email. And sign up for the blog. So it's been a really nice addition, I think, this year, just to be able to describe in writing and kind of summarize all the things that we talk about in these sessions. So thank you, Jared, for doing that, and for Chris for bringing all this great info.
Thank Okay, team, so we're going to go ahead and hop in. Everyone can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to move into the bright ideas, which, as I mentioned earlier, came from you all. You guys have the bright ideas, and hopefully we have some things that we can share with you that'll be helpful.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you everyone for your participation. Definitely want to shout out that Chris just dropped in the chat the link for that transition fair and conference. Again, it'll be at Region 13, so definitely click on that link if you want to sign up or learn more, or if you're in the area, it's probably going to be a wonderful event. But yeah, let's go ahead and dive into bright ideas. Just like Andrea said, we want to share your bright ideas. So during the registration process for our webinars, we always ask questions. And for this session, we decided to ask 3 questions because we want to share your bright ideas with everyone. So the first question that we asked was, the Individuals with Disability Act idea is no longer in effect for students with disabilities after high school. If a student needs services in higher education, how do you connect them to these supports? So Corey Spruce from Pearland ISD had a great recommendation. She says that she coordinates supports for students with local transition services during their senior ARD meetings. Thank you for the response, Corey. We really appreciate it. This is great. ARD meetings can be a great opportunity to talk to students about those transition services. So we have a few recommendations based on Corey's response, and the first is to review the Texas OnCourse module within our Texas OnCourse Academy, Transition for Services for Students with Disabilities, to learn more about ARD meetings and support services. This module has great resources and insight into how transition planning plays an essential role in providing students with the necessary skills and services for a smooth transition into adulthood. Our second recommendation is to help students connect with the school's disability office and establish that contact. You know, this is a great way to help your students feel more comfortable with the person that they're talking to, get to know them, and who they might need to access in the future. The third recommendation is support your students' self-advocacy and familiarity with the accommodations they need. Make sure that your students know what their accommodations are, what they might need to ask for, so they really can feel comfortable and confident with the information that they need to be successful. So the second question that we asked was, for transitioning into adulthood, do you have a roadmap of what local and state resources may be available for students or adults with disabilities in your community? And what does that look like in your advising practice? So you guys, again, had some great responses. And Cynthia Beria, who I believe I saw on this chat today. So hello, Cynthia. Thank you for your bright idea. She's in Round Rock ISD, and she said that her roadmap includes individualized transition plans, regular check-ins to ensure a smooth process, partnering with local agencies, and bringing awareness and education to campus. This is great, Cynthia. Thank you again. So just a quick reminder, Chris did mention the roadmap earlier in the presentation. So if you're looking for somewhere to start or you want to look at a roadmap, definitely reference that. Jared popped the link for that roadmap in the chat, and then again, we'll share it at the end of the presentation. So based on our question, we have some recommendations as always. So one of them is to identify the transition specialist in your district so you know who to go with for questions that you might have. Another recommendation is to create a list of local resources and community partners for students and families. This could be a list that you hand out at parent functions, student events, those kinds of things. You can also communicate this information with students in ARD meetings, IEP meetings, or even graduation meetings. Because as you guys have mentioned, these are great opportunities and the perfect place to talk about these resources and connect students with those appropriate people. So just like Chris mentioned, we did ask a question about that transition and employment designee. So in our registration process, we asked, do you know who the transition and employment designee is for your school? And we went through 131 responses, and 44% of you said that they did not know who their TED designee was, and 21% said that they did. Well, the great news is you can reference that Ask TED directory from TEA that Chris mentioned, and now find your TED designee so that you can get that information that you might need. So this is the end of our Bright Ideas section for today. But again, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to answer those questions during the registration process. We really do look through all of your answers, and we really appreciate hearing what you guys have to say and then sharing your ideas with others. So thank you again for that.
Thank you, Lauren. So I'm going to hop into, now that we've finished our Bright Ideas, we're going to hop into our Texas On-Course Academy Spotlight. And today, for those of you that may be unfamiliar with Texas On-Course Academy, or maybe you haven't had an opportunity to explore like our specialties area, we have a transition advising course where you can learn strategies to help students with disabilities get ready for life after high school through career exploration and workplace exploration. Sorry, excuse me. So I have a couple of handouts I'd like to share with you. These are sneak peeks and are not currently available on our website yet, but we will be sharing the links for those with you as well. So our first sneak peek handout is a transition planning timeline. As we know, transition planning starts early, and we want to ensure that all of our students stay on track each year. So this timeline is a great handout to share with your families, students, and colleagues. So as we go through here, when or before you turn 14, this is a great time for them to be exploring their interests, their needs, and their strengths. And then when they're getting closer to 16 during this time, it's important for them to continue or start to write and track some of their goals that they have for after high school graduation. And then when they're getting closer before 18 or when they turn 18, providing support, and where you can provide support and advocates for them to ask for a notice about what rights they will have and whenever they become an adult. So after graduation, definitely encouraging them to continue to work with outside services for support. So this is just a nice little handout to have to just kind of keep the students on track, families on track, as well as different colleagues through your organization. And I wanted to mention really quickly, we actually recently launched My Texas Future, which is a great resource for our students to be able to explore their career interests, as well as update their information throughout the years, where it's all saved in one place. And Jared will talk a little bit more about My Texas Future and some of the sessions that we have going on with that. But another great resource for you guys to be able to tap into. And our second sneak peek handout, this handout is helpful to learn about how vocational rehabilitation counselors can support your students at school, at home, at work, and as well as in their community. So again, another great resource to share with your students, families, and colleagues. Vocational rehabilitation counselors provide a plethora of services that you definitely need to tap into to help just all of the individuals with disabilities prepare for career and essentially become more independent. Whether some of those services include medical, psychological, job matching placement, therapy, transportation assistance, referrals, for whether it's hearing, visual, and other examinations. Because all of these services are separate from the services provided in a school. The agencies provide these vocational rehabilitation services and coordinate with the school district to ensure that students receive the appropriate services. So the sooner the planning is initiated, the sooner the support and the services are able to be coordinated and our students are able to achieve the goals that they need to be successful. So those are some great handouts that we have, and I'm going to pass it over to Jared to talk a little bit about what we have going on at Texas OnCourse.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. So I do want to give a special shout out to the Texas OnCourse Academy. It's your source for college and career preparation. The Texas OnCourse Academy offers free online professional development for college and career planning. The Academy has over 30 learning modules on endorsements, graduation plans, career pathways, entrance exams, college applications, military academies, financial aid, and more. All of these free modules are available remotely, and you can review them at your own pace. And you can also even try out the course within the Transition Services for Students with Disabilities. Thank you. I want to give a shout out to the My Texas Future Learning Institute. The My Texas Future Learning Institute is a brand new learning series designed to showcase My Texas Future and how it can support college or career and college exploration for Texas learners in middle school, high school, and as adults. We have 3 remaining sessions throughout the school year. We have 3 remaining sessions throughout the school year. Our next session will be on November 21st, which will cover the college and career action plans within My Texas Future. The college and career action plans give learners a step-by-step list of action items to complete each year to prepare for college and career. Starting in 7th grade, students will find resources about exploring career clusters, endorsements, choosing a program, and applying and paying for school. We will also shed light on the Program Explorer, which has over 100 different degree programs in Texas, allows students to filter to compare programs to find the right fit for their future. Also want to give a shout out to the Texas OnCourse Network newsletter, your monthly toolkit for college and career success. Over the summer break, the Texas OnCourse Educator Playbook went through a refresher and has transformed into the Texas OnCourse Network newsletter. We have monthly topics designed to guide educators throughout the school year. This past month, we had resources over dual credit, and this upcoming month will pretty much have like a newsletter centered over My Texas Future and any college application processes. And I'll go ahead and drop a link in the chat so you can register as well. I also want to give a shout out to our YouTube channel. So subscribe to us on YouTube. All of our past recordings will be uploaded to YouTube. We have playlists designated for each the Professional Learning Series and the My Texas Future Learning Institute. We're currently at around like 1,000 subscribers or so. So we're hoping to get to at least 1,500 by the end of this academic year. So we hope to see y'all subscribe to there. And now I'll transition back over to Andre, who's going to go over our wonderful resource document.
Yes, thank you, Jared. And as promised, we'll be providing you with our resource document. Here you have it. It includes all of the important documents that Chris covered today, as well as links to our Texas OnCourse resources. You can definitely scan that QR code now if you'd like to have fast access. I know I personally prefer that, but we'll also be sending that out in our follow-up email. So you'll have it there as well. But what you can't see in this image is that it does also include on the second page all of our contact information. So feel free to reach out to any of us at any time if you have any additional questions. And then we're going to open it up for a Q&A session. So we're going to answer some of those questions that are in the Q&A that you guys have. If you have any more questions, feel free to drop those in there. We'd be happy to answer those as we go through. And of course, as we're doing that, we really do greatly appreciate all of your feedback. So if you don't mind just answering our quick little 5-question survey, this really helps us continue to create content that is beneficial and meaningful for you guys in real time. So we want to make sure that each of these sessions, every month, every week, are most beneficial for you. So as we're going through the Q&As, please take a couple moments to answer our survey questions. Thank you so much.
All right, just waiting for some questions to come through. Guys, if you have any questions, you can just put those in the Q&A.
kind of more like a practical question, and I feel like you definitely covered it, Chris, but I know like it was interesting to hear about the age of 14 for when students with disabilities start receiving services. And so I feel like is it accurate to say like students receive services when they are 14 and they also have an ARD like annual ARD meetings through like 12th grade to that like transition, or how does that work? Like, or what are folks required to do?
Okay. So the districts are obligated under something called child find, and so they have to look for students within their territory that may have the need for special education and related services. They would, identify those children and then do an evaluation. Um, if after the evaluation, that ARD committee meets for the first time, what they call an initial meeting, and there's a determination the student would qualify for services, they could then enroll and receive special education and related services on that end. And so this really starts early for students with very specific disabilities, like those with visual impairment or those that are deaf of or hard of hearing. There could be services received by a school district before age 3, even. There was some early childhood intervention and some different services that are available. But from about age 3 on, students could be potentially receiving the special education and related services until 21. It depends on if they're 21 as of September 1st of that school year. They could continue to receive services until the end of that school year, potentially, if they qualify. For the transition purposes, what we kind of went over in that first section was just that in our state, specifically within the IEP document itself, it first needs to be addressed by age 14. The hope is that, especially in thinking about the self-determination and decision making, that some of that is starting earlier, that there's activities they're taking on, or maybe there's some like TEKs in their classes that are helping hone in on some of those skills. So they would have that. To answer your question about having an ARD meeting, they should be having an ARD meeting at least once a year after they're identified and receiving the services. But the transition component does not need to be first addressed until age 14, or in that IEP in place once they reach 14. So addressed typically at 13, but hopefully some of these practices are taking place earlier, even though it's not needing to be documented until age 14.
Sure. No, that's helpful. And then it was a good reminder too. I sort of forgot about the like through age of 21. So that's helpful to know for those services students receive in those high school years.
Yes, and for those in your district that if there's graduation related considerations for students with disabilities, I would recommend that, if you're not part of that ARD committee typically, or in part of a special education team, that if there's questions about, students and their status in terms of potentially staying until age 21, that you have those conversations with your ARD committee team members for individual students, because there's differences on what students are eligible to continue or return for services after receiving a diploma versus who may still be eligible, contingent on what option they meet for graduation, which is outlined in the Texas Administrative Code. And so my recommendation is, if it comes to the who might be eligible up to 21 kind of question, if you have questions about an individual student, you have those conversations between special education team members and other campus and district team members for an individual student situation.
That's great. Thank you, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any other questions. Thank you all so much for attending our October Professional Learning Series session. And we look forward to seeing you guys in November. I hope you all have a great day. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you all.
You.